I don't know if you'd be interested in this, but it's the most bizarre, kind of alarming, and maybe even sad story. I'm married to a wonderful man, and as of last year, we had our first kid together. However, I used to be married to a previous guy who turned out to not be a very good person, and we also had a kid together. But my current husband has been so kind to her and treated her as his own since they met when she was 4. And I'm just incredibly lucky to have such a great guy. We've always been very open and honest with each other. However, he is not and never has been the type to indulge in gossip. So, in this case, I knew it wasn't him hiding information from me, but more so him forgetting to tell me, or giving me a warning in advance. I don't blame him, but I certainly give him a hard time occasionally because of it. Anyway, on to the story. His side of the family likes to do a lot of gatherings for not only holidays, but people's birthdays, sports games, any reason they could think of to celebrate, they took advantage of it. They always invited us, but we didn't always go. A few times we went, it was fine, no issues, and I got along with a lot of his relatives. I was nervous about bringing my daughter with me, not wanting them to judge me or treat me differently, but to my relief, they all welcomed her with open arms, just as my husband did. She had so many kids to play with. His parents adored her. Everything went well. So, when they invited us to another barbecue, we made plans to go, and my daughter would be going with us. It was at his parents' house, and a lot of people were already there when we showed up. We made our way to the backyard, and my daughter immediately ran off to go swimming with the other kids that were there. Everyone was talking when someone showed up that I hadn't met before. We'd been to a few of these parties, but we also missed some of them. But I had never met this woman before. My husband introduced me to her, saying it was his Aunt Gail. She found a seat by his mom, her sister, and we continued our conversation. She asked a few questions about me, and that was it. After some time, my daughter ran up to me asking for something when Gail looked at me in shock. "That's your kid?" I proudly confirmed and told my daughter to introduce herself. As she normally does, she says her name, her age, and her favorite animal. Gail seemed to have a fake smile on her face as she responded to her, and after a brief back and forth, my daughter ran back off. Gail then asked how long we'd been dating, and I could see that she was trying to do the math in her head. Before I could respond, my husband answered and explained that my daughter was from a previous marriage. She seemed to eye me for a while as if I was lying, and she could see through me, but it wasn't a lie. If I have to explain any further, I do it similar to what I did above, without giving much detail. But my husband's mom changed the subject and got Gail talking about something else. Awkward conversations seemingly averted. When the food was done, I made my daughter's plate and helped the other kids, and when they were all settled, I made my own and joined my husband and some others in eating. Again, everyone was doing their own thing, and sometime after everyone had eaten, the kids started playing around with some fake swords and water guns. My daughter ran over to me like she wanted to spray me, so I gave her the normal parental look. The parents out there will understand what I mean. Just a playful look of "don't you dare." But she also had her just as equally evil grin, and I knew it was going to happen. So I braced myself as I got splashed with water. I stood up to play with her and made the comment, as some parents do, "I brought you into this world, little girl, don't make me take you out of it." She screamed and I went to chase her. Some people were laughing and my husband even told her to run. But when I caught her, she tried to play dead, laying still with her tongue sticking out. So my husband went to grab her when she jumped up. He always played around with her like that, and it's one of the reasons we both love him. Anyways, after a bit of playful back and forth, my husband helped me up, and we went back to the deck, my daughter now preoccupied. As we approached, I noticed Gail had a pretty angry look on her face, while his mom kind of had the look of concern. Her eyes were wide, and she was looking back between my husband and Gail. I didn't know what was wrong. I certainly wasn't going to pretend like it was any of my business, so I just grabbed my drink and watched the kids. His mom started to say something when Gail loudly said, "That's not funny, Sandra." I looked over at her confused and at a loss for words. "I'm sorry?" His mom touched her knee and tried saying something like, "She was just playing around, Gail." But she seemed to lose it. She adjusted in her chair. "Playing around?" Then my husband's dad chimed in from over by the fire pit. "She was just joking with her kid, Gail. Let it go." Obviously annoyed with her. "Well, it wasn't very funny to me," Gail said, as she stormed off inside. I immediately started apologizing profusely. I didn't know what I did, but apparently I had done something. His mom said it was fine and ran off after her. My husband told me everything was okay, and his father did too. No one would tell me what had set her off, and why, but they just tried to assure me that it wasn't my fault. No matter how much they said it, though, I felt like I really messed up and ruined the night. Apparently, Gail left shortly after that, and everyone else tried to and successfully lifted the mood again, but I was dwelling on it hard. I don't know what happened, nor what I did or said. Once we got back home and my daughter was in bed, I finally asked what the heck had happened. My husband said that Gail just gets sensitive around kids, but that made even less sense, and I had to push him to tell me more. I feel bad, but as I was going to dwell on it forever until I figured out what I had done and how to avoid it in the future. But what he told me was not what I was expecting. Apparently, back when my husband was still a child, Gail also had a child. But she was not the best parent. His words, not mine. She did not want the kid, but yet she kept it. But over time, she got better at it and seemed to show her love for her daughter. Then one day, there was a lot of talking between his parents that he couldn't hear, and the next thing he knew, Gail was staying with them for a few days, until she wasn't. And then he didn't see her for a while. Turns out, Gail's daughter died, but she didn't report it until the day after. That alone caused a lot of suspicion, as anyone would presume. There was a huge court case about it, and eventually it was ruled an accident. Again, my husband was still very young, so he didn't get to hear about this until he was older. Even then, he didn't probe into it, which was understandable. Apparently, my comment of taking you out set her off. And while it was just a saying and I was just playing around, it really affected her. And I honestly felt horrible for it. I had no idea, and apparently no one thought it was necessary to bring it up, which I also understood. "Hi, meet my Aunt Gail. She lost her kid, so watch what you say." Yeah, there's really no way to bring that up. But apparently the whole thing caused quite a rift in their family because of the whole situation. Some family members feel like she did it on purpose, and she should have been charged to the full extent. I kind of got a vague rundown of what happened from my husband and left it at that. But when we found out I was pregnant and she started acting strange around me, I decided to look into it more myself. I found the articles about it online and at our local library, and let's just say I can definitely see why so many people think there was something more that happened. I don't want to go into full details, because I don't want to reveal my family more than I already have. Which is also why I called her Gail. It's not her real name. But since learning this, I have kind of felt uncomfortable around her. She's made some odd comments and would look at my infant in a way that would make anyone hold them tighter. I know there's really nothing I can do at this point, but it sits in my head and sometimes I think about it. Thankfully, we only see her maybe twice a year at his parents' house, so We can avoid her for the most part. But having 2 kids now, and knowing that they mean the world to me and my husband, I can't imagine that kind of loss. And I hope that she truly is innocent. Back when I was about 16, me and my 2 cousins were staying over at my grandma's for our summer vacation. My cousin, Dan, was about 14 and was really interested in ghosts and talking about how he once saw something hanging from the Black Bridge at night. This Black Bridge is an abandoned train bridge that's really high up from a creek below it. There was some background story about someone who had once hung themselves there. The words Bloody Death were also spray painted on the underside of it in a place that was hard to see. It was likely some teenagers having some fun long before our time. Anyway, we always thought it was an interesting story, and so, on a dark, foggy night, we mustered up the courage to go explore the spooky bridge. The cloud cover made it darker, so it was particularly creepy with the way the shadows from our flashlights were so sharp and animated. After some time, whispering about the drowning victim and the hanging man, we started to spook ourselves to the point that we both agreed that we should head back to the house. As we made our way back with the allegedly haunted bridge to our backs, we decided to take a quick look back to see if we were being followed by a ghost. The flashlight caught a reflection of eyes in the darkness from where we came. Looking back on it now, it was likely a raccoon. Obviously, that's not how we reacted at the time as we ran full throttle back to my grandma's house. Dan suggested that we make a Ouija board to see if we can talk to it. It was drawn on a big sheet of paper, and we used a shot glass to guide answers to our questions. We were whispering to make sure we didn't wake anyone up. As he explained the rules to me and carefully repeated that you should never play with a Ouija board if you don't believe in it, and you should never question it, like it's some kind of insults to the dead or demons or something, I'm guessing that was one of the rules told to him by whoever he learned about it from. He also said that if anything goes wrong, we'll need to destroy the Ouija board as soon as possible. I didn't know if these were actual rules for playing it, since I was never interested enough to learn about that stuff. It's important to note that we were playing it in the kitchen with visibility of the living room. We didn't have to look to know that our other cousin Bryson was on the couch, snoring loudly, especially for an 8-year-old kid. It was basically the middle of the night, maybe around 2 a.m. I should also mention that all the chairs happened to be pulled out around the table, even though there were only 2 of us playing. You'll see why I mention this shortly. At first we began asking questions like, is anybody there? And will you talk with us? And before long, the shot glass began to move under our gently combined fingers. I couldn't tell if he was moving it, and he actually asked me if I was moving it. I thought he might have asked me to make me think that it was totally legit. In the beginning, the answers were a bit weird and not really making sense, but after a while, the answers were coming through. Yes and no. Of course, those were common answers. I thought that I would mess with him a little and just disobey the rule about asking if the game is real or fake, just to see his reaction. With a whisper, I asked it, and Dan's eyes became very wide with the shocked look on his face. The shot glass started moving around faster and faster, and at first I thought he was doing it in response to what I'd asked. Suddenly, though, my 8-year-old cousin sleeping in the other room, who could not possibly have heard our whispers, sat up quite suddenly in a creepy and unnatural way, exactly like a possession scene from a movie. It gave me goosebumps. His eyes were still closed, and he replied to my question to the Ouija board in a loud, weird voice. He said, "We are sitting here now. We can play the game now." I think we could both feel our hair standing on end, as wide-eyed Dan grabbed our makeshift Ouija board and ran onto the porch, tearing it up as he went. We both went outside, too shocked to investigate any further. He was bent over with his hands on his knees and looked up at me saying, "That's why you should never question it." He was quite serious. Looking back on it, I can speculate that maybe it was just a wild coincidence that Bryson happened to sleepwalk at the exact moment and sit up really fast like that, and utter a sentence that just happened to be the perfect scary answer to my forbidden question, which he shouldn't have been able to hear. Also, it doesn't seem like something an 8-year-old could think up on the spot like that, especially when he was snoring and there was no way he could hear us. No matter how I look at it, it was a really creepy moment that I'll never forget. Were there actually ghosts or something sitting in the chairs, telling us they were now ready to play with us? Needless to say, we didn't do any more Ouija boards in that house. Ever again. This story starts out in the very early 1990s. The story takes place in Northeast Ohio. I wish I could tell you exactly what high school this occurred at, but if I did, I would never hear the end of it from people who know me. While in high school, I vividly remember a girl by the name of Carrie Keith. Carrie Keith was a short, blonde-haired, skinny girl who was always very nice to me. Nothing serious ever happened between Carrie Keith and myself. It's just Carrie Keith always treated me with kindness at a time when some other students were bullying me. I also remember some other memories of her. Not only did she live down the street at the end of the block that I lived on, but Carrie and myself were in the same class together. I also remember Carrie getting into a fight with another girl who accused her of flirting with her boyfriend. She denied it, of course, but the other girl didn't believe her and a fight ensued. Needless to say, Carrie won that fight. I also remember in home ed class, we were learning how sewing machines work. Don't ask me how, but Carrie Keith managed to get her thumb right under the sewing needle when it was in motion. She screamed the loudest F-bomb I ever heard when that happened. I have all these memories of her. After high school, I lost touch with Carrie, and I never saw her again. About a year, perhaps 2 years ago, the memories of Carrie Keith came back into my mind. I was wondering what happened to Carrie all these years. I tried to look her up on Facebook, but nothing showed up. I looked on Instagram and Twitter, but nothing showed up. Then I started asking old friends from high school about her, and that is when my search took a wild, crazy turn. Every single friend from high school that should have known her looked at me with a puzzled look and asked me what I was talking about. They told me that there was no such girl in high school named Carrie Keith. I even asked a friend named Janet, who I remember being in the same class as Carrie and myself, about Carrie Keith. She didn't know who I was talking about. Why am I the only one who remembers this Carrie Keith? The memory of her is so vivid. Did I cross over into a parallel universe in which this Carrie doesn't exist? My memories of her are vivid and clear. One other thing about this that has me asking more questions: in 1987 through 1991, those were my high school years, I remember everything I did during those years and what transpired. All but the summer of 1990. The summer of 1990 is a blank. I can't remember anything I did during the summer of 1990, while the other summers are very vivid in my memory. Why can't I remember anything about that specific summer? It's like a memory block was put up and nothing makes sense about it. I'm the only one who remembers Carrie Keith. I wonder if parallel universes have anything to do with this. Am I living in a parallel universe in which Carrie doesn't exist? And what happened to me during the summer of 1990 that a block in my memory prevents me from recalling that specific summer? I may never know. I dreamed of being in a supermarket sitting on the floor next to this boy named Richard. He was platinum blonde as if he were albino and had blue eyes, but sometimes they were green. He told me, "You're back. Things have changed here. Now, you have to stay silent." He covered my mouth with his hand because I was asking for explanations, and suddenly I saw this woman opening the door wide. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and she was looking for something. It was as if she were blind. She tried to hear walking noises and smelling all the time. She looked like a zombie. I don't know what happens next, but Richard put his forehead against mine and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll come get you. I promise." He was taking deep breaths. I can still hear those breaths in my head. He ran away and I saw black. Suddenly, I found myself running. Behind me, there were two women chasing me. As I ran, I held on to my phone and the pendant because it makes noise. Then darkness again. I was motionless against the wall of a room, covered with old red and black carpets and red wallpaper with gold decorations. The furniture was dark wood and old. There was a woman with me in the room, and she was looking for me. She was trying to pick up every sound that I made and sniffing. I got annoyed and told her, "Stop looking for me. You know I'm here anyway, just let me go." I don't remember what she said, but a child entered the room and I tried to escape by walking fast and holding my phone pendant still. I went down the stairs. Everything around me was gray and looked like a factory. I heard someone running behind me when suddenly Richard reappeared in front of me. He took my hand and led me into a ventilation shaft. He hugged me tight and said, "See, I came to get you," while he looked at me. It was too real. I can't forget his face, and what he told me also shocked me. I've never seen this person in my life. So, what do you think? Hey Raven, I've enjoyed your videos for the greater part of a year now, and I finally have a story to contribute to one of your topics. This is about an ex of mine who I've been in some rather frightening/intimidating situations with, but this is not necessarily one of those times. I was 24 when this happened. He's 9 years older than me. Definitely old enough to know better, but then again, so was I. It happened on Easter the year after we broke up. He had already had a different girlfriend for a year, and she was treating him the exact same way he had been treating me. It drove him bonkers. So, eventually he hit me back up, and we were talking here and there while they were broken up. It was a decision that I regret, and thankfully a decision that I won't ever feel tempted to make again. After realizing that I was a fallback, I stopped seeking conversation with him and wouldn't take him up on his offer to see me. Easter came, I knew he spent the holiday alone, and I knew that family-centered holidays are some of his favorites, because he's passionate about his family. So I had said Happy Easter, and when he replied to me, he was very drunk. He called me and kept trying to keep me on the phone, and I kept telling him that I couldn't talk because I was busy. By nighttime, he had stopped contacting me for a few hours, and then suddenly told me he wanted to see me, way more intoxicated by this time. I told him no, and he told me he was going to come to my house to see me, which I told him not to do because, well, duh. My parents know how he treated me, and he was honestly just not welcome at this house. He told me he was on his way in an Uber, and I didn't actually believe him. But eventually I got the call that he was here. I was scared because he just showed up at my parents' door at 11 p.m., and we've had physical issues in the past while he was this intoxicated. Once he saw the fear in my eyes, he tried to guilt trip me into spending time with him, and he looked like a lost puppy, which now is laughable. But I have a tendency to fawn, and at the time I kind of fell for it. At the same time, he really was nearly 20 miles away from his place at a random small town that doesn't have a bus stop of any sort, and struggles to get Uber drivers in the middle of the day to take rides, let alone at midnight. So, I sat with him while he tried to order an Uber, and he couldn't afford one because he had spent the last of his money on an Uber to get to my place. I didn't know what to do, and I needed him gone. I didn't have a car, and I didn't have my license. Neither did he. I could drive, I just didn't have a license because I had rough teenage years and I just wasn't as much of a priority. After hesitating a lot, I decided that I would borrow my mom's car to take him home. I grabbed the keys, and we left. While we were driving, he turned the radio down, and my mom's car has something wrong with the volume knob where turning it down actually turns it up unless you do it very slowly. So it started blasting. I was already so anxious, getting distracted easily, and it was late enough at night that my ADHD meds were well worn off. So the sudden volume increase threw me off, and I jumped. I turned the radio off fast and tried to focus on the road. Luckily, my ex realized the burden he had placed on me by starting all of this, and he was encouraging through the whole drive. Not usual overly critical and judgmental self. We got about halfway through the drive, and I realized that the gas gauge was on E. So I told him that we needed to get to a gas station, and we found one just a few blocks ahead. As soon as it came into view, the car cut off, and I had to drift into the turning lane, and I didn't make it into the gas station parking lot. We got out, and immediately saw two men booking it to the car. Thank God they were asking us if we needed help as they ran, because that would have been a terrifying moment. Seeing two men running towards me in the middle of the night at an empty gas station parking lot? Oof. However, if you live in a decent-sized city with a homeless problem, you'll know that homeless people do like to hang around gas stations and do favors of any sort for anyone, for the chance to score a couple dollars. Especially at night, when the only transaction can be made through a service window. People are forced to wait in line outside, and it can be an easy way to panhandle. People already have their money out, and it's harder to lie that you don't have money. They guilt you into it, etc., etc. No shade. I do respect the hustle, to be honest. I just know that it's intentionally manipulative. So, these men help us push my mom's car into the gas station parking lot, up to a pump so I can get some gas. They ask for some money, but of course, it's okay if I don't. They just knew that I needed help. Which was true and untrue at the same time. I give them some change out of my mom's console, because the $5 in cash that I had was going into the tank. I walked to the window to pay for my gas, and accidentally pull out a single with my $5 while I waited in line. And the guy who just helped me noticed and said something along the lines of, "You don't have to lie if you didn't want to give it." Honestly, I didn't want to hear it while I was waiting in line and pumping gas, so I said that I didn't realize I had more than a $5 and that I was grateful for the help. Which realistically was true. I don't know what I would have done without them there. Then I handed him the $1. After I paid and pumped, we got back on the road, and I got him back to his place. He wanted me to come in, and I told him that I couldn't, but he started getting persistent. And I was so out of energy for arguing that I just went inside for a minute. He then proceeded to try and be affectionate. But this goofy dude really looked me in the face and said the girl's name that he was crying over. So I laughed, pushed him off, took him up on his offer for a line. I know that that wasn't a wise decision, but we all know that ADHD meds are just stimulants for a reason. And I was ready to just be out of there with any kind of compensation for my inconvenience. I then got back in the car, I was so annoyed, and after I relaxed and got my head back into the game, I started heading back to my house. I was about a quarter of the way, and I heard a metallic clank that I thought was another vehicle that had just driven over a flattened side. Then I heard a metallic scrape following me well after the passing that car. I looked into the rear view and saw a couple of sparks from the back of my mom's car and freaked out immediately, and pulled over into a parking lot, an auto parts shop, funnily enough. I got out and got to the back of the car and saw that I had dropped the whole muffler's tailpipe. It had been held on by some wire at the time, already needing to be fixed, and now it was just hanging from the back of the car, scraping along the road as I drove. So I sat down and honestly just cried a little. I realized that there would be no way that I could keep it from my mom that I had used her car without her permission to take my ridiculous ex all the way across town because he showed up at our door drunk, expecting me to be happy to see his abusive ass. Once I finished crying, I took the tailpipe the rest of the way off, threw it in the back, and texted my mom what had happened. Then I finished my late night joyride, heavy on the sarcasm. I put a few more dollars of gas in the tank at a different gas station, grabbed a snack, and made it home with a loud-ass muffler. To top it off, my vape died as I got home. In the morning, I had to tell my mom what happened, and despite being stressed and ashamed of the whole occurrence, we did have a good laugh about how ridiculous every step of this event was. We still laugh about it sometimes, and joke about how it would make a funny adventure movie, like Are We There Yet?, where he keeps running into obstacles driving cross-country and rolls up in the frame of his Lincoln Navigator. But writing it all out like this has definitely made me stressed enough to want to smoke, and I quit vaping or smoking everything over half a year ago. This all goes to show that God had me protected that night, because it all could have gone so much worse at any and every point, but I just barely scraped by. Literally. Thanks for reading my story. Sorry if it's not written well. This was a somewhat traumatic event that I had to write in a couple of different sessions. I hope that this can be a lesson for someone to just block him. I promise, no one is worth that much stress. Just a heads up, this story, it may be triggering to some people, so you may want to add a warning to the beginning. Consider that your warning. A number of years ago, in the middle of the summer, my friend Matt and I decided that we wanted to go out and do some urban exploration. We hadn't done much that summer since it was hotter than Hades out there that year, and on this day the heat had finally broken some, so we wanted to get up and get out for at least a little while. We were both 16 and both of us had a lot of pent-up angst, so we wanted to let as much energy out as we could. And to let that energy out, we decided biking to an abandoned factory would be fun. We could check out the machinery, break a window or two. We were young and stupid, and I know we shouldn't have done that. And just mess around for a while. The factory that we wanted to check out had been closed for about a decade, and had sat completely void of any activity since it was closed. Other than other people that wanted to check it out, that is. We biked out to where it was, and immediately were taken aback by how messed up the building actually was. We hadn't been there yet. We'd only known where it was, and the walls were heavily damaged. The windows were all already smashed out, and there were spray paint tags all over the front. It was at least easy to get into the building. The side doors were all busted out, so there wasn't really any challenge there. When we got in, the air felt stale and stuffy. Kind of like an abandoned factory that had no working ventilation for around a decade. Because that's what it was. We were both kind of nervous at first, wondering if there would be someone in that building or something. I don't know why that was our first thought, other than we were just dumb kids. Matt called out asking if anyone else was there, to which no one replied. No surprise there. We wandered around the main hall to just sort of look around and see what we could find, but there wasn't really much there. I won't bore you with the details of our adventure around the empty spaces, because really not much happened. It wasn't until we started going around the administrative parts of the building that we found what this story is about. We were going around the offices, just checking out what furniture was still there, when we got to one that was decently sized, probably management style. I was checking out one of the desks, just looking in the drawers and whatnot, when I pulled one out and heard a thumping sound. I peeked into the drawer but didn't see anything in the back. I made a comment that there wasn't anything there that fell, and then Matt responded saying that it could have been something behind the drawer. I lifted the drawer and pulled it off the track, and sure enough, he was right. There, on the ground, was what looked like a small camera case, looking like it was behind the desk and had fallen to the floor. I reached back and grabbed it and unzipped it, and honestly, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. In the case, there were a few photographs, 5 to be exact. Matt and I looked through them, and after a few moments of figuring out what I was looking at, I started to feel sick. The photos were, and there's honestly no softer way to say this, of either a murder or of people celebrating a person that was murdered. There were a couple of photos of a person's corpse that was, again, there's no other way to say this, mutilated. And then the rest of the photos had a group of 3 guys looking like they were covered in blood, standing around said body, with their thumbs up and creepy grins on their faces. They looked insane, like they were completely out of their mind, which you would have to be if you were taking photos of yourself with a dead body and covered in blood. I asked Matt if I was seeing what I thought I was, and he confirmed what it was. We looked at the photos again, seeing if maybe they put their names on the back or something, but there wasn't any information on them, nor in the case. After a few silent moments of us just thinking that the pictures were messed up, I asked what we should do, and Matt said that we should just put it back in the desk, and forget they even existed. I actually agreed, and I zipped the case back up, tossed it back into the desk, and we decided that that was enough for both of us. We decided to end our adventure, and we decided to go home. Those images have honestly haunted me for a long time, and unfortunately they do randomly flash in my mind. Did we find someone's secret stash of photos they took after they murdered someone? Like some kind of disgusting trophy? Of course, there's the possibility that they weren't real, but they looked very real. And then why would someone keep fake murder scene photos like that? We never went back, and we never reported them, and unfortunately the factory was demolished not too long after this. So, surely someone else had to have found them, right? Either way, I try not to think about this too much, and would rather just forget it. But hopefully your audience thinks this is enjoyably creepy. So, this is something that I have been living with for almost a year now. Any names I give here will be made up to make things easier. I'm sure you will all understand why. Last year, I thought it would be a really thoughtful and sentimental Christmas gift to my family to trace our family history and put it all together, as something to show off. I've been wanting to learn more about our lineage, about my ancestors and family that I was never able to meet. I was all ready to pay for that family history website and DNA place. I'm sure you know which ones I'm talking about. I was hoping to get some names and little details here and there from family members, so it was probably around August or September when I started asking. I got some pretty normal answers and a decent amount of information from people like my parents and aunts and uncles. But when it came to my maternal grandparents, things seemed to get strange. The first time I asked, it was something simple such as where they grew up, their childhood home, city, and state. My grandma gave me a curious look at first, but when I said I was just interested in the houses, she became an open book. She told me the house that she lived in, the school that she went to, and even the names of her close friends. I always loved hearing the stories she told, as she was always so animated about it. But when I started pushing further into the years they started having kids, she seemed to tone down her excitement. Her responses were vague and didn't really give me more than just the days my mom, aunt, and uncles were born, and that was it. She didn't even mention the hospitals. I just thought maybe she was tired after everything else she already told me, so I let it go. With the information I had, I started putting it all together and started working on the site. While I went through the details, I started having issues linking my Aunt Lisa. The site seemed to have trouble locating her. Unfortunately, unlike my other aunts and uncles, Lisa never had any kids, so I couldn't even backtrack to bring her up. It did have a method to add someone manually, but I didn't have all the information, so I needed to go back and ask. I started with my mom, who was able to give some information, but said that my grandma would definitely know more. So I went back to her. But asking specifically about Lisa seemed to shut her down. She asked me again why I needed to know, and as I continued to be vague, she continued to become more and more upset. I really wanted this to be for her especially, but it was about to turn into a full-blown argument, so I gave up. I told her that I was just trying to put together a family tree for us, and just wanted to get as much information as I could. But that explanation only seemed to make her more anxious. She told me it was a waste of time, that those DNA tests aren't very accurate, and can't assure they will give you the right results back. She then said the family could just give me any information I needed. That's when I reminded her that I just tried to and she had shut me down. She didn't really want to talk after that and said that she would work on it with me later. All I could do was drop it, but there was no way I could let this go. My grandmother, the woman that could normally talk your ear off, refused to talk about the birth of her first child. Something that should normally be a happy moment, right? So, I took this to the genealogy center in my state. Surely there had to be information there, as my family, at least as far as my maternal great-grandparents, had always lived in this state. But they also had nothing. I could find information on my mom and her other 7 siblings, but nothing for Aunt Lisa. How was this possible? She was born in the late 60s, so while it was some time ago, it wasn't that long. My Uncle Jack was second born, and while it did take some time, I was able to find him. So why not Lisa? Something wasn't adding up. I started looking into reasons why this could happen, and some of the reasons I found included lack of records for birth, which typically happened with the homeless or migrating families, loss of records, adoptions, also some illegal adoptions, and other unsavory ways people get kids. But none of these made sense. Lisa looked like the rest of us. Dark hair, brown eyes. In fact, she looked very similar to my mom, other than Lisa being super tall. Was it really possible that she was brought into the family? And if so, why was it such a big deal? This was turning into a situation bigger than just an ancestry and family tree thing, and I was determined to figure out what was happening. I went and got my grandma's favorite little cakes, raked up her leaves in her yard, and gave her little dog a bath. Anything to make her happy and put her in a good mood. As we sat in the living room eating cake, She finally sighed and said that she knew what I was doing. She's a very smart lady. She told me that there was a good reason why she didn't talk much about Lisa's birth, and was surprised because I was the only person that ever really pushed it. She took me to the basement, and had me go through some very old and warped boxes that had obvious water damage. She pulled out a few loose pieces of stationery as well as 2 pictures. One was of an infant, and the other was of the infant and my grandparents. On the back of the infant picture was a date, Lisa's birth date, and the one with my grandparents was dated about a week after. But the picture of the infant had the name Elizabeth on it. My grandma confirmed that the infant was indeed Lisa, and the other was a picture when they met her and took her home. Lisa was born as Elizabeth, and she was not biologically hers. Okay, so she was adopted. No big deal, right? No reason to make it such a secret. But, of course, it wasn't exactly legal. At the time, my grandparents had been trying to have a kid with no luck. They were both in a very bad state of mind and had all but just given up. However, my grandpa had been working for someone, for a legitimate business, but the owner was a known member of a local and very dangerous mob. My grandpa always stayed loyal to the company, in fear that if he left, something could happen to them, but he also minded his own business. But at some point, he was now within the view of this mob guy, and when his teenage son got another girl pregnant, they had to do something about it. Without my grandma actually saying it, she basically explained that the girl's family was threatened to give the baby up, but their solution was to give the kid to Abe and his wife, my grandparents, since they had been trying so hard for their own kid. She was basically given to them by force, and my grandfather paid a nice sum of money to stay quiet and never mention them again. So, when they brought her home, they had a mix of emotions. But one thing my grandma couldn't handle was that they were always watching them. My grandma loved her and knew that she was hers the moment she saw her, but she was worried about the what-ifs. So, my grandpa was given the boss's blessing to leave the city. And so they did. And they changed my aunt's name. They just vowed to not tell anyone where she came from and told family they just hid the pregnancy in fear they may lose the baby. And no one questioned this. She thinks that taking Lisa in is what caused her to be able to have 7 other kids. And she truly believes that she was a blessing to the family. Not that I would disagree. My Aunt Lisa is a wonderful person. And she told me that my grandpa would have chewed her out if he knew she told me. He had actually passed away 2 years prior. I promised her that I wouldn't tell anyone, and she threatened that if I did, she would take me with her to the grave. Mostly joking, I think. So, here I am now with the knowledge that my aunt is not biologically related, and telling her that could cause potential safety concerns if anyone from my grandfather's working days is still around. I have not said a word, but part of me wonders if her biological mother is out there, wondering what happened to her baby. I never did finish the tree for our family. I still plan to, but now I'm just trying to figure out if I want to keep it for myself, and maybe, just maybe, I can find something related to her birth and give some people some closure. Hey everyone, I'm new here, so please be kind. This happened in 2010. I was in primary school, in my first ICT class. Our teacher was a white male, maybe 50 years old or less, kind of short, 5'7", and chubby. I remember him being calm and kind. His initials were NDA. I'm not saying his name for security reasons. I can vaguely remember his personality, and I think he had blue eyes. This is important. I don't know or remember what happened to him, but the next year he was no longer our teacher. I continued going to the same school. It has primary plus high school, and here starts all the weird things. It's 2017. I was in high school, and it's our first ICT class that year. The teacher presented himself as NDA. I couldn't believe my eyes. He was the same teacher we had in 2010, same exact name, but he was a completely different person. Where was the short, chubby, blue-eyed man? The imposter was very tall, so skinny that his shirt and pants were too big for him. He had a gangly appearance and a strange accent. Now, NDA could have lost some weight, but this is a whole different person. No blue eyes, he grew over 5 inches, and also his personality was different, a bit unpleasant. I asked my mates, but no one remembered the 2010 NDA. The majority of them were new at the school, and my old friends from primary school had no memories about him, considering we were 6 to 7 years old. I searched NDA on Facebook and I found his page. He has old photos, but none of them look like the NDA that I remember. I don't know what the hell happened. If this is my mind playing some weird trick, or what. Maybe it's a Mandela effect or some crap like that. Please, tell me if you have experienced something like this. This story may not be as creepy or as exciting as many of the other stories on here, but it has had my head spinning for days now. Recently, my brother got me into a new anime called Demon Slayer, and I really ended up liking it. My wife and I recently finished the Mugen Train arc, which introduced my new favorite character, Ren Goku, who is the Flame Hashira. I won't spoil anything, that's not what this is about. What really has my head spinning is that when we watched it, his name was not Rengoku, it was Sengoku. Usually I'd write this off as a mishearing his actual name, but no. I remember it clear as day, in Tanjiro's voice, and the voice of all the other characters referring to him as Sengoku. And we were watching the English dub version, so there's no way any sort of foreign translation flew over my head. I even remember looking up replicas of his sword because I was excited to buy one from a vendor that makes battle-ready anime swords, and it's even there in my search history. As I'm writing this, I see that there is a character in the One Piece anime named Sengoku. But the thing is, I've only seen the first 3 episodes of that anime, and that character was never introduced. I don't have anything against One Piece, it's just a long anime with too many episodes. I'll probably never catch up. Not to mention, Sengoku is a real Japanese name as well. I'm getting a little off track, so I apologize. Nothing else in the Demon Slayer story is different, as far as I'm aware. I haven't gone back to rewatch every episode. I want to ask my wife, but I'm afraid that she'll put me in the crazy people house, so I keep it to myself for now. Am I currently in a different reality? Maybe I was just in a different one periodically, just to watch an arc of Demon Slayer? It doesn't scare me in any way. If anything, it amazes me. But to think that I could be the only one right now that heard a name in a popular anime where the name of the character is one consonant different from what everyone else currently knows. This is just a scary thing that happened during the summer. I don't know exactly what this was, because I can't figure out what happened. It was Labor Day weekend. Almost time to head back to school, but my family and I were in the mood for one last hurrah. So my mom invited my aunt, uncle, and cousin down for the weekend, and my other cousin was also having an end-of-summer cookout, too. which meant everyone would have something to do while they were here. Everyone arrived Saturday, but the mood was slightly somber. My stepdad asked why, and my uncle told us that Princess Diana had just passed away. The adults talked about it for a little while. My family, although very patriotic and American, are huge fans of the royal family. You'll see why this is relevant later. Meanwhile, my cousin headed outside with our favorite Barbie dolls and some other toys, and we started playing and laughing. It wasn't long before they called us in for dinner, then, after a few more minutes outside, in for the night. We grabbed everything and headed in, only to hear my uncle talking about the weird nightmare he'd had a few days ago. He said that he'd went to sleep and woke up to everyone telling him that something bad was gonna happen. Get out. Something bad was going to happen, he needed to get out. Then, everyone's faces started melting. At the same time, some ladies came in and took his daughter away, and then he woke up. My aunt told him to cool it with those kind of stories in front of us kids. And my parents said, no, she'll be fine. After all, it was just a dream. I was, but for some reason I kept thinking about it. And I still do now, especially after that night. It was now bedtime, and my parents gave us strict instructions that we were not to leave the bedroom unless we needed the bathroom, or if one of us was sick. She said the grown-ups were turning off all the lights and everybody was tired. None of your usual tricks, my mom had warned, mostly to my cousin. She could be pretty mischievous, and of course, I would follow. You guessed it, we got up in the middle of the night. We had a few cookies and a juice box, and next we ventured out to the swing set for about an hour, and then I shut the party down, because I knew everyone would get mad if we got caught. We quietly crept inside, and by my orders back to bed. Here's where it gets scary. At breakfast the next morning, my cousin starts ratting us both out. She couldn't help bragging about our little adventure last night, but she starts adding things that didn't happen. Like after the swing set, we walked down to my best friend's house to the gas station up the road from us. Then 2 women in a black car come up to us and shout my name. She said we tried to run, but they kept following, all while calling out to me. We finally stop and they ask us what the hell we're doing out this late without any adults. She told them I was sleepwalking and she was trying to find me, and they told her, my name is Bridget, and the other lady with me is Alicia, and we've got to take you home. She said the car was a black Suburban, and my uncle chokes out, that's the car I saw in my dreams. The room gets silent, because that was a detail he didn't tell a soul about. Until my mom asks me if this is true. I fess up to the cookies, the juice box, and the swing set, but I swore to her we never left the yard and went straight to bed as soon as we came in. My cousin cries out, no, remember? You wanted to show me that playground at that girl's house. I can prove it too, because you left your glow-in-the-dark star thingy outside. No, I didn't. It's still on the coffee table, I yell. No, it's not, my aunt says. I'm looking right now and your starlight toy is nowhere to be found. It's too big to miss. I'm scared and angry by this point, but I'm not letting up, because I know we did not leave the yard, and I would never leave my star glass outside. It was more of a decoration than a toy. My uncle and stepdad walked to the backyard, and sure enough, there's my star, lying on the concrete. But that wasn't all. My pink jump rope is beside it, which I hadn't been able to find for months. I can't speak, and my cousin is blabbering on with more crap. And you know what else Bridget said? She played us a Spice Girls song and told us they're from England. And she asked us who else is from England. And of course we said the royal family, and then she asked us about the beautiful princess that went to go be with Jesus, and we said that her name was Diana. My jaw just drops, because it's almost like she believes this happened, but I know that it didn't. My mom suddenly grabs my arm, and I just know that I'm in serious trouble. I'm almost in tears, but she whispers in my ear, "Baby, I believe you. I checked around the house about 4 this morning because I had this bad feeling, and I saw your star on the coffee table. I also saw the boxes in the trash can. So I think someone's playing a big joke. Plus, I don't know a Bridget or Alicia, who drive a black Suburban, so calm down. You're not in trouble. Just please don't ever go outside late at night again without one of us. I nod and walk back inside. Sadly, this doesn't end here, because that afternoon we see a black Suburban drive up and down our block and stop by our mailbox. And twice, my cousin points out Bridget, a middle-aged white woman with jet black hair, and Alicia, a 20-something with curly brown hair and a nose ring. They wave at us, and then toss a Spice Girls CD out the window and into our driveway. Then, after that day, we never see them again. To this day, my cousin still sticks to her story. She even remembers the song Bridget played, which was Say You'll Be There, and that the car smelled like cigarettes. But now, I believe her. I believe something happened that night. I believe my cousin went somewhere with somebody or several somebodies, but who? Was something or someone that looked like me able to lure her away from the house? And who were Bridget and Alicia? Were they angels watching out for her, or something much darker? Did a bunch of us jump timelines and everything just got jumbled together in one big mega glitch? And what about my uncle? Was this a warning of this weird mix-up? Too many questions and no answers. But at least we enjoyed the rest of the weekend. Especially that cookout. I have a story about a secret that my family kept for a long time. And while I understand why it was kept from me, it's one of those things that, when I found out what happened, it hit me hard. My opinion on the people involved obviously changed by the end of it, and someone that I thought was a hero ended up being nothing more than a terrible person. For my entire childhood, I genuinely thought that my dad was a hero. I thought that he was in the military and fighting for my country. I was proud of him, even though I could barely remember what he looked like. I guess I should step back a slight bit. When I was much younger, my dad was present. I have a couple photos of my dad with myself and my mom. I was the first and only kid that my mom and dad had. I can't even really give many memories of my father, because I was only around 5 when he disappeared from my life. Obviously, I didn't understand why he was no longer in my life at first. I just know that he wasn't there. I do have one memory, though. I remember that it was at night. I was crying, and my dad gave me this tight hug saying something along the lines of, "Sorry, buddy. I'll be back eventually. You'll be good, okay?" The only problem is that I'm not even sure if this memory is real. It's probably not. I think it's just one that I made up for some reason. One that I fabricated in my mind to make sense of my father's absence. To go along with this, my mother told me that my father was in the military. She told me that he had been shipped out, and that he was fighting the bad guys to save the country. When I started to get older and more cognizant, it made sense that he wasn't home because he was a soldier. When he disappeared, it was 2001. I obviously didn't know what happened on 9/11 at the time, but again, as I got older and learned about it, it made sense that he was overseas fighting a war. As I got older, I always made it a point to mention how much of a hero my dad was. I would tell my teachers, my friends, people that I barely spoke to. I would always say that my dad was in another country fighting people that were evil. My mother started the lie, but my family kept it going. They would always go with what she told me. I spent birthdays without my father, holidays without him, and it was hard as a little boy. I know I asked my mom numerous times why he wasn't able to come home for at least Christmas, and she would just tell me that he would be home soon, and that he couldn't abandon his post. I would ask why he never called or wrote us letters, but she would just say that the calls would get really expensive, and then said that he had written me letters. She would gaslight me into believing that he had sent letters for my birthday last year or a few years ago. She had even told me that one of my presents from Christmas was from him. I believed every bit of it. I believed that the military wasn't letting him come home and that he had sent me the letters or presents. She kept this up until I was in my preteens, around 12 years old. When I was 12, things started to not add up. It would have been 2008-ish, and I was old enough to watch the news, and I saw the world and events that were happening. It had hit a point where it didn't make sense for why he hadn't come home, and my preteen brain hit a point where I wanted to confront my mom and ask her for the truth. So I did. I confronted her at one point and asked her, "Hey, Mom, you need to tell me the truth about Dad. He's not overseas. He would have come home by now. Where is he?" At this point, my mom had the chance to tell me the truth. But instead, she broke down crying and told me something else. She told me that while my dad was overseas, he had been killed in action. She looked me dead in the eyes and told me that my father had died in 2003, that he was killed over in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, and that she wanted to tell me, but she couldn't ever bring herself to do so. So, once again, she told me that my father was a hero, that he was killed defending the country, that he had died with honor. It's almost sad that I could wish that this was actually the truth, but what really happened was not this. I found out the real truth when I turned 20, about 8 years ago. It was the day of my 20th birthday. I had made it to my 20th birthday without my father. My mother had done her best to raise me, but I had to do a lot of growth myself. I had to watch the other boys be taught how to do things by their fathers, and wish that I could have that too. But I couldn't, right? Because my father was, according to my mother, killed in action overseas. All of it was so emotionally confusing. I wanted my father to be in my life, but I was also proud of him for his sacrifice. But when I turned 20 and was having dinner with my mother and my grandma, something came up that involved my dad. My grandmother made a comment that confused me. "Well, it's sad what happened, but at least he won't be able to get to you two ever again." She said this, and I stared at her in confusion. Then I saw my mom start to have that panicking face she had when she told me he was dead. It was then that it clicked that something was wrong. I wasn't being told something, or someone was lying. I asked my grandma what she meant by that, not even hesitating or giving myself time to think about it. She looked at me with her mouth open like she'd been caught in something, and then looked at my mom. My mom started crying at this point, and my grandmother apologized, telling her that she thought I knew about the whole thing and that my mother had told me. My mom said that we would have a conversation after dinner, but I wasn't really hungry at this point. I could feel the pit in my stomach growing, knowing that they were hiding something. When we got home that night, my grandmother and mother sat me down. And at that point, I was told the truth. A truth that I didn't want to hear. Back when I was 4 or 5, when my father left my life, it wasn't because he was shipped overseas to fight terrorism. It was because he was an absolute monster. That night that he went away because he attempted to murder my mother, and he likely would have killed me too. And for whatever reason, my father snapped that night, and in a drunken rage had stabbed my mother 3 times and left her for dead. I was told that he attacked her because she tried to stop him from beating me, a 5-year-old. He had hit me numerous times that night, apparently knocking me unconscious, and then tried to kill my mother. My grandmother had been there that night, and she called the police when he was attacking me, and it's because of her that my father was stopped. My mother's life was saved, and possibly my life was saved. For the entirety of my childhood, I thought my father was this amazing person, a hero. I told people I was proud of him, that I missed him and loved him, but the entire time he was actually an attempted murderer that would have likely killed my mother had the police not showed up. The comments that my grandmother made was actually because my father had died in prison recently. He had apparently gone into cardiac arrest and was unable to be revived, and my mother had been notified of it a couple days prior to them telling me about all of this. This was probably the hardest day of my life. To find out that the man I wished had been there every day growing up had almost ended my life. It's been a few years now, and I'd like to say that I've moved on from all this, but it's still something that tears at me from time to time. I don't blame my mother for keeping this all from me, but it's still so painful to know that she had lied. I'm sharing this now in hopes of letting some of it go, putting some of it out into the world, hoping it'll make it a bit easier. To those who knew me growing up, I'm sorry for lying to you about my father. I believed all those lies myself, and I thought I was telling you all about this amazing man that was an honest hero. When, come to find out, he couldn't have been more of a villain. And to my younger self, I wish I could go back and give you a hug to prepare you for the pain you would feel when you're told that your dad is dead. Both the first and the second time. It was the summer between high school and college when I got my first real job. Anything to get me out of the house and away from my parents and little sister. You know the feeling. It's that time in your life when you feel your independence coming on. The job didn't pay a lot, just a few dollars an hour, but not bad for a kid in the 70s. This job required that I patrol a 30-mile stretch of interstate and about 20 miles of secondary roads, removing the carcasses of dead animals killed in the roadway. I lived in the south, and it gets tremendously hot here in the summer, which makes any outdoor job oppressive. And that heat gets into everything, especially the carcasses. The flies, the ants, the bugs, the opossums, foxes, and the buzzards. The bottom line, you want to get there as soon as possible after death, and clean up everything and move on. I was given an ancient pickup truck with a 3-speed on the column and no radio, a hard hat, a reflective vest, and several masks. In the truck bed was a 55-gallon drum in which I kept a shovel, a hoe, a rake, and several buckets. I even had one of those large, wide shovels that people up north use to remove snow. At the end of the day, you get to empty out the back of the truck and relive that day's horrors all over again, and then wash out the truck bed for the next day. This job made eating your mother's homemade spaghetti dinners difficult, no matter how hard you tried to put that day's memories out of your mind. In the summer, there are a lot of tourists on the road. More traffic equals more dead animals. Most vehicles then did not have air conditioning, so you'd have the window down trying to get as much air as possible. If you didn't get to the scene soon enough, you could smell it when some distance away. Oh boy, could you smell it. I remember this particular week had been really bad. I'd picked up 6 deer, 4 opossums, 5 foxes, and even an armadillo. I don't remember how many dogs, cats, raccoons, or squirrels. I remember it was a Friday afternoon because I wanted to finish up and get to the weekend. I was on one of the secondary roads when I smelled a bad one coming. I hadn't driven far when I saw it. The carcass was mostly in the road, with only part of it on the shoulder. It had been run over more than once. I think there are sometimes people who aim for things like that. I pulled off on the shoulder, kicked on my flashers, put on my hard hat, vest, and mask, and took the snow shovel from the back. As I approached, I saw something I will never forget. It made me nauseous. I ran to the shoulder of the road and was just able to get my mask off before I vomited. I saw the bottom half of a jaw. It was lying partly on the road and partly on the shoulder. And in that jaw were teeth, and in those teeth were fillings. So, here is my experience. And I started doubting that I'm shifting universes because of it. I had a girlfriend for 1 year, and it's been great. Her family was nice to me, and my time with her has been more amazing throughout the year. I met her when I was on a really high vibration, and even though her relationship with her family was problematic since the beginnings of the relationship, it didn't have an effect on us. Suddenly, things started glitching, and my energy started to drop when I got pulled into the negativities they created with her. And the stories of them not liking me out of nowhere, and it kept my head spiraling out of control. My mind got cornered in a very bad place of fear and doubt. I noticed that my once very sweet and loving girlfriend started changing into this manipulative, opportunistic, and selfish person as well. I noticed the bad behavior and doubted that I was trapped in a narcissistic family dynamic, and decided to leave her immediately. She didn't even try to talk to me, which is so unlike her. Suddenly, all my memories of us started feeling like it was unreal and made up by my perception. I didn't think of parallel shifting possibilities until then, and I accepted that I was just manipulated. If so, I think she's a really skilled actress. I started going to therapy and focusing on myself. After a few days of the breakup, I broke my ankle and stayed at home in a cast. Today, I called a long-distance friend of mine who was a very solid character in my life for over 10 years, who had been supportive and loyal and a good listener. I considered him almost a mentor because of his wisdom and unique way of looking at life. He was saying the most immature and ignorant stuff all of a sudden, out of nowhere today. He was very disrespectful and dismissive. I've been noticing that he was changing and becoming more distant over some time, but this person who spoke to me on the phone, I don't know him. So suddenly, over a very short course of time, I lost my beautiful girlfriend and left with this ugly version, and my best friend is also this really crappy version. Did I shift reality, or was the veil of BS lifted from my eyes? I really don't know these people. Also, a very distant friend from the past had suddenly connected with me, and we speak every day now. He lives in London, and he convinced me to move there, and things are getting really fast-tracked into this direction. I have no idea what's going on. The OP did add an update. I shifted. It was very tough because it's a big shift. I keep reuniting with people from the past, people who knew me before I grew to the person that I am, and they are showing me that I matter to them and that they value me. And fake people are falling one after another like they never existed. New energy is present. The energy of love and of truth. I'm one of those annoying people that are all about the spring and summer months. I like to get out and go for walks, work on the yard, and just spend all the time I can outside in nature. So, the minute that it starts to get warmer outside, I break out my walking shoes and workout clothes, and I set time aside every single night for a walk. Most of the time, I just like to walk around my neighborhood, but I also get those nights where I just need to get out and walk around in a place that isn't quite so familiar. That said, I have a story about something that happened last year that I felt I should share, because it scared the hell out of me. Some people say there wasn't much that happened, but to me it was horrifying. And I think others that read this, that have been in similar situations, would agree to how terrifying it was. So, to start out this whole thing, the night that this happened, I decided I wanted to go walking around a nearby pond/park. It's a park that was built around a decent-sized pond. It has a good-sized walking path, and it's incredibly calming. I like to walk it a couple of times to get 2 or 3 miles out of it. Most of the time when I go in the evenings, it's not heavily occupied, and it was pretty much the same on this night. Though, there were a few cars in the parking lot. I guess another important point is that the parking lot is near the start of the loop, and there are some lights around it, so it's not like it's too creepy to be in at night. At this point, I was almost done with my first lap of the loop, which meant I was coming up on the parking lot. As I was about to pass it, I noticed an older beat-up pickup truck pull in and park in a spot near the entrance of the lot. Nothing too out of the ordinary, but I noted it because it was pretty rough. It stood out more than anything because of how battered it was. I walked past the parking lot as I normally would, when I saw the doors open to the truck as I passed it. At the time, I didn't think it was too far-fetched. They were getting out and the timing was just perfect for me to pass as they exited. The door squeaking open did catch my attention, and I glanced over to see the 2 guys getting out of the truck, both wearing fairly practical street clothing, dark shirts and jeans. When they looked at me and I accidentally made eye contact, one of them lifted a hand in a friendly wave. I reciprocated because why not, and that was that. After a few moments of me walking past the lot, I heard them talking and getting on the path, and while I couldn't quite make out what they were saying, I did hear one part of it specifically that made me stiffen a bit. One of the men said, "I don't know, dude. I bet she could take you." Now, again, this could have been nothing at the time. Just 2 guys ogling and fantasizing to each other about a passing woman, which is creepy, yes, but also not uncommon. I tried to ignore it and just picked up my pace a slight bit, thinking I could put the distance between us and that would be enough. This is where things got scary for me. As I sped up, I had managed to step on something on the trail. I don't know if it was a rock or a walnut or something like that, but it was hard and it made me stumble. I didn't fall or anything, but I stumbled and had to catch myself. As soon as this happened, I heard the same guy from earlier say, "Yo, now's your chance. I bet you could grab her." Followed by the sound of someone starting to jog on the trail. Obviously, I looked back to see one of the men starting to run in my direction, which made me realize that the comment wasn't a joke. This guy's intent was to grab me. As in, take me. I immediately took off into a full sprint. I had one thing going in my favor in this case. I was wearing clothes made for running, and he was wearing blue jeans, which definitely made him slower. I kept up my fastest pace possible, glancing back to see if he was still chasing, which he had been. After running on the trail, I got to a part of the park where it veers off in 2 directions. One way was the rest of the running path, and the other was a children's playground area. I was thankfully far enough away that I was able to turn around toward the playground and try to throw them off. I don't know why that was my decision, but it was what my brain told me to do. I ran towards the playground, climbed up the steps to the higher part where one of those tube slides are, and I crouched down waiting for them to pass. I stayed there for several moments just steadying my breath and pushing away the adrenaline so that I could hear what was going on. Eventually, I heard the thumping steps on the path, followed by a man breathing heavily, and then a second set of steps followed by the other man laughing. He joked about how I was fast, and then made another comment that freaked me out. Man, if you want to bag one, you gotta choose one that's slower than you. You can't go for the fitness chicks. They always get away. That sentence was horrifying in and of itself. They always get away? How many times had this other guy, quote-unquote, tried to bag one, in his words? Worse yet, how many times had he been successful? I stayed there for a while and peered out after a few moments had passed, making sure that they had walked away. They had walked back towards the parking lot, so I pulled out my phone and called the police. I told them that I had just been chased in the park by two men, described them and the truck, and mentioned that they had made comments about potentially kidnapping me. I know I probably sounded crazy, but the dispatcher took me seriously, for which I was very grateful. I stayed on the phone with her until the officers arrived. They walked up the trail toward me and told me that I could come out and that it was them. They talked to me about the whole thing. I described the men, the truck, told them what they'd said, and the officer definitely looked disturbed by it. They walked me back to the parking lot towards my car so I could leave without issue, and they told me they would keep an eye out for the truck. And that was pretty much it. I'm guessing they never found the guys because they never called or anything, but I also haven't seen the truck or those guys again, thankfully, and I hope that I never do meet them again. Before we begin, thank you for the existence of this sub. As you can see, I just created an account, and I must admit that I never had a particular attraction for the site, but after telling my story to my best friend, he encouraged me to tell my story here, hoping that doesn't seem weird as possible, and maybe some of you can help me see it more clearly. I'm going to keep my real name anonymous, so you can call me, let's say, Jared. I'm 20 years old, and I'm from the west of France. I grew up as an only child in a happy family, where I never lacked for anything. It was made up of my father, my mother, and my maternal grandparents, who are like my second parents, or so close. I had a fulfilling childhood and adolescence without any major problems or various traumas. I am therefore, at least in my opinion, not predisposed to dementia or fabrication. However, there is a reason why I call this story Special Memories. Indeed, since I was very little and until very recently, until I was 17 or 18, let's say, I sometimes remember things that no member of my family has the slightest memory of. And this, even when I remember having experienced these moments with the people concerned. These range from very simple anecdotes from my childhood, like remembering that someone finished the bottle of soda when everyone told me it wasn't them, to perfectly remembering that one day my mother had argued with me about absolutely getting my Netflix access, around the age of 15. Even today, my mother assures me that she never did that, or even having a huge feeling of déjà vu on events that have just happened, but the memory of which seems to be much older. I often have the impression of being outside my body and telling myself that I'm living a life that I have already lived. I don't know if I phrased that well. And I often tell myself that I'm in a sort of eternal beginning, as many people believing in the theory of perpetual reincarnation can sometimes put it. I was able to talk to a psychologist about it monthly between the ages of 18 and 19, but she found nothing abnormal about me. After talking to my best friend about this, he encouraged me to share my story here and interact with the community. Hey Raven. I heard the recent coworker stories, and one of them reminded me of a guy that I worked with a long time ago, and his unfortunate and tragic fate. Upfront trigger warning, and there's no easy way to say it. And I understand if you don't use it because of this, but it involves the tragic deaths of 2 children. So, to my listeners, this is your trigger warning for this story. This does contain some very deep subject matter. As I said in my comment, the story is way worse than it already sounded. So, in the TARDIS, we go back to 2008 to lay out some background. In 2008, I was working in a call center here in my city. It wasn't super big back then, but we ran 3 campaigns out of there when I first started. I worked on the Frontier campaign during phone and internet predominantly on the East Coast. We also did a Wells Fargo campaign, well, until the big Wells Fargo scandal broke. But the Wells Fargo was run by the manager that we'll call Dale. He was an older fellow, very prim and professional, but approachable. When Wells Fargo stopped running with us, their whole team was absorbed by the Frontier campaign, and Dale got promoted to the front office. I worked there about a year and I left for what seemed a better opportunity, and that didn't pan out. And I got a different job for a while when one day, out of the blue, Dale calls me and convinces me to come back. After that, he and I were pretty tight for the next year until I left for good. My cousin had also worked at the same place for quite a while after I left, and one day, about 2 years after I had left, he and I were hanging out, smoking, and playing video games, when out of the nowhere he was like, "So did you hear about Dale?" I told him no and asked what he was talking about. He pulls out his laptop and shows me a news story that left me pretty stunned. So, Dale and his wife had split up, and it was a messy divorce/custody situation, with her threatening to keep his kids from him altogether. Well, one weekend during a court-sanctioned visitation, where his 2 sons got to spend a weekend with him, things really spiraled, when his soon-to-be ex came to pick up the boys. The prospect of losing his whole family had made him snap, and it turned into a hostage situation that went on for several hours. The police forced entry when they had heard a single gunshot, and what they found was tragic. Both boys had been dead long before the mom showed up, single gunshot to each as they slept. The single gunshot they had responded to was Dale turning the weapon on himself. I would have never have pegged him as that type of guy, but when you get into those intimate family matters, I guess anyone can be pushed past their limits to do unspeakable and unforgivable things like this. DTA and CYOA. Don't trust anyone, and cover your own ass. Much love, Raven. I used to work at a gas station in the middle of my town, and it's not relevant to the story, but I hated that job so much. It didn't pay worth a damn, the hours sucked, management was awful, and people were beyond disrespectful to you when they were there. But hey, that's retail, right? It was even worse 2 years ago, because around August, we were under a really bad heat wave and getting pelted with 100+ degree weather. On top of that, the AC at the station was struggling and would just sometimes not work. The hotter the day, the more likely it would stop working, and the station would get swelteringly hot. Thankfully, on those days, people wouldn't really come in, so I could just sit there behind the counter with a fan blowing on me, or stand in one of the soda coolers. I would have to keep an eye out for customers when I did that, but I really didn't care. It made it at least somewhat bearable. During this one afternoon, I was behind the counter, and I think I was pulling some product from a box to stock it, when I saw someone come in. I looked up to see an old man walk around. He had a full beard, was bald, and just kind of reminded me of a stereotypical old man. I was a bit confused, though, since he was wearing a windbreaker jacket, and with how hot it was, he had to be dying in that thing. One point of note, I saw him out of the corner of my eyes, so I didn't technically see him walk in the store, but I saw him inside the store, which was a bit weird because I didn't recall the door chime going off. I said, "Hey, let me know if you need any help with anything," just trying to be nice, and then got back to my work. I looked up every once in a while to see if this guy needed help or if he was ready to check out. Every time I looked up, he was in a different spot in the store, but each time he would be looking over at me. Of course, this puts me in an awkward headspace. Either he's just a nice dude that wants to talk to me, or he's gonna be a creepy old man. I was hoping he was just lonely and wanted to talk, as some old people tend to be, because dealing with creepy old men was always a pain in the backside. Then I heard him shout out, "It's a hot day out today, huh?" I didn't look up. I could tell he wasn't at the counter, and I just said, "Yeah, it makes it even worse when the AC doesn't work." And he responds, "Yeah, I can imagine." And he goes back to silence, just looking around the station, and I continue pulling stuff out of a box. And then I hear him speak to me again. Out of nowhere, I hear this guy say, "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me, Alice." I immediately stopped and looked up when I heard him say this, mostly because I didn't know how he knew my name. My name is Alice, but I didn't wear a name tag, and I never told customers my name. I had never seen this guy before, so him saying he was sorry that he wasn't there when I needed him was beyond confusing. So I looked up to ask him what he meant and who the hell he was, but much to my surprise, he wasn't there. He wasn't just not at the counter, he was completely gone from the store. The door hadn't opened, the chime didn't go off. There was no way he could have hidden behind a shelf, and he couldn't have gone into the back without me seeing him, and there was nowhere else for him to really go. I just stared out into the empty station, waiting for him to jump out of somewhere and say, "Gotcha!" or something like that. But that never happened. Eventually, my trance was broken by the door chime going off and my coworker coming in for his shift, complaining loudly about how hot it was in there. I asked if he saw an old man in the parking lot, and he said no, that it was dead out there. I just kind of nodded and said, "Okay," and decided that I had just encountered some kind of weird spirit that knew who I was, and moved on with my afternoon. It was truly bizarre, and I have no idea what that whole event was, what he wanted, why he said what he said, but it was what it was. I don't work there anymore, and I never had another experience like that, and by the time I quit, the AC still wasn't working right. I'm not one for superstition. I have a pretty bad memory, so I'll often get details mixed up, get corrected, and move on with my life. So for me to be here, I have to be completely convinced that I'm right, and a detail has absolutely changed. No question about it. I've never been one for music or instruments. I have no talent for it, no ear for it. I don't enjoy it. I've tried some stuff, but nothing stuck. I did, however, try to learn the piano, and that didn't stick either. But I did it enough, and messed around with pianos in general enough that I know which side is high-pitched and which side is low-pitched. My sister has been learning piano lately. A few weeks ago, she showed me a song that she learned. Something seemed off with the keys, but I brushed it off and assumed I was just unfamiliar with the black keys, since I never got that far in learning. That night, she did something with the white keys for our parents. I was in the room, and that's when I actually paid attention. The low side of the piano was on the right. In my memory, piano keys go high to low, left to right. I asked my dad why the piano keys were switched, and he and my mom looked at me like I was crazy. They said I had failed and that the keys had always been low to high. There's no way in hell I would misremember a detail like that. Absolutely No way. I'm not thinking of a xylophone or anything. I've run through it in my head so many times. High was always left. I wish I was making this up, but I even texted a couple of friends about it because I was so freaked out. When I try to remember myself playing piano, it's right in my memory, but the memories are fuzzy, and I feel weird trying to think about it. I don't have the same feeling trying to recall other memories. I think it happened when I was cleaning upstairs. I wiped down a window, looked downstairs, and almost pissed myself because my front door was in the wrong place. It was just a reflection from a new mirror my family had gotten, but I was staring at it way too long before I realized it was a reflection. The reflected floor and walls lined up perfectly with the real ones. I went down and touched the mirror and it felt normal, but after that is when I noticed the piano. And I've never felt so disoriented by a mirror before. I don't know if the mirror was the cause, or the angle at which I saw it, or if the piano is the thing that changed, because it was in the room that belonged to the window I was cleaning. I don't know, but it's freaking me out. The damn piano changed, and this is one thing I know that I didn't remember wrong. It's not Mandela, I'm not superstitious. I don't think the heart or kidneys moved places, and I don't think it's ridiculous that I misremembered Berenstain instead of Berenstain. If anyone knows what's up, feel free to share. Everything is similar enough, and I don't feel like I need to get back. I just want to know if anyone has felt anything like this, or if anyone remembers the pianos like I do. As a side note, I sometimes get a weird vertigo feeling when I walk into certain places, even if I've been there before. Like something is urging me to get out. I recently went into one of my house's bathrooms and felt it. I don't know if that's a universe thing or a spirit thing, and it doesn't seem to affect anything else, but I thought I would mention it. Meter readers for gas and electric check neighborhood house meters monthly and then move on to the next house with no time to spare. One day I felt someone looking at me and looked out the kitchen window to see a guy who didn't look professional at all standing right in my yard looking past me into our sunroom. No one was inside it, and there were no real items of interest either. I finally realized that it was a meter man, but I wondered why he was gawking. Another time he didn't see me again observing him. He stood maybe 7 minutes staring into that sunroom, and then he finally moved on to the next door lot where he walked high upon a hill on the side of their property where they didn't have their meter, and continued to gaze at our sunroom. This gave me the total creeps. I was a security officer at a university. I'm a 5'5" female. I had an administration building to lock up and walk through, and I kept getting a feeling of someone beside myself being inside for several nights. And I walked the length of the hallway, and as I passed each classroom, I peered in and then closed the door. I saw one already closed and dark and entered, triggering their motion light. I wasn't expecting to see a guy seated there at a laptop. I asked why he was there, and he gave me some BS about someone knowing all about his insomnia and allowing him to be there. I worried that he couldn't have even been a student there at all. Plus, I considered that it was just him and me there now, and that the door was locked. I couldn't seem to reason with him to vacate. I had no one else working that night. It seems regardless of the type of work, if you're dependable, you're often alone, and understaffing can be the norm. I wrote up the report and didn't challenge him, because my guts told me not to. The next night when I worked, the supervisor told me he checked out that same room that I'd noted, to find the guy doing something inappropriate to himself in that dark classroom, looking at adult content on his laptop. The supervisor had retired from the military and then retired from a police force, and was now second in command at the university with a wealth of experience. I was really glad that he had been the one to encounter him that night and not me, because it could have been a really dangerous situation had he transformed his fantasy into a reality and dragged me into his fantasy. I once watched a YouTube video of an FBI agent who was a behavioral psychologist because I was trying to figure out why certain people stalk others. We had experienced a creepy scenario. A guy my sister had merely worked around called her many years after last working with her, and it had been 5 or even more years since she'd seen him. He explained that he would like to take her to dinner, saying that he'd lost his wife, and she told him that she would think about it. Her coworkers wanted to encourage her and egged her on, so eventually she caved, despite her better judgment. He seemed to be polite, and they had a very nice time, and after several times seeing one another, he started playing termite bopper games, acting like there was something wrong when there wasn't. She doesn't suffer fools, and said, "Okay, let's forget it, that's fine." After this, he drove by her home, a far distance indeed, and one morning when I'd been attending to something at her home for her, saw him on the new security equipment that he drove up and rang the front doorbell, when he knew she would never answer if unannounced. Plus, she was working extra that morning at her job. I then saw him move to her back door and try it, and because I was inside, I heard the knob jiggle as I was watching the video. He glanced all around to see if anyone had noticed him first. I wondered if it had been open, would he have searched her home? Planted a camera or a transmitter to listen in? Would he have waited there and then scared her to death or attacked her? I shot out of the garage, locking the steel door of entry into her kitchen, and waited for him to round the corner to where I stood. He realized I was there but thought that it was her and called out her name, saying hello, seeing my reflection in the glass of my car's windshield, I suppose. I said no, it was me, and he kept asking questions. Where she was, why she would be at work, as if he highly doubted it, if she was seeing someone else, to which I replied yes. He then challenged me, asking the person's name. As if it wasn't creepy enough, he kept gazing into the open garage to the entrance to the kitchen that I'd locked. It had been several years back and he wouldn't drop it. Then, 5 years after, I got a call at 3:30 a.m. I was at another location entirely, but not but 10 minutes away. I answered and he asked if I thought she was possibly at her computer right then. I told him no, that she had to get up for work at 5 and that he knew this as well. It was absurd. I told him that she leaves the computer in that room light on routinely. I even worried that he may be standing right in front of that window and could have done, well, anything. Regardless of how long passes, he seems to resurface again in time, and as the psychologist on the program noted, it feels like yesterday to stalkers when it may be 15 years. There have been 4 to 5 incidents, calls, voicemails, emails, and a letter, and she has repeated simply stating that she is not interested. You just can't underestimate some people's offbeat perceptions of reality and how it affects them to make them feel justified to bother the hell out of someone else. And it is a very creepy behavior. Well, I'm not sure what exactly this would fall under. I'm very skeptical of the Matrix hypothesis, but I do believe in the possibility of alternate universes. I've heard many people describe my situation as a form of quantum immortality as well, but that doesn't seem to fit right either. Here's my situation. I've seen my own death more times than I can count. The first and most frequent was when I lived in Federal Way, Washington. I didn't drive at the time and I was walking to work. Suddenly, a garbage truck comes around the corner where I'm waiting to cross the street and drives by a little faster than it should be going. Nothing actually happened to me. However, the second the truck was past me, I suddenly had the memory and a slight physical sensation of the truck taking the corner way too fast and falling over sideways, and crushing me. It scared the crap out of me, and that particular scenario happened enough times to give me a phobia of garbage trucks. However, there have been more scenarios than that. One time I was exiting the store that I was working at early in the morning, and a plane fell out of the sky, crashing into the store from above. 3 days before Christmas. Another couple of times, my husband and I were on the bus to Seattle, and on the freeway, the driver had a heart attack and would either drive us into oncoming traffic or over the edge of a cliff. But every time this happens, I don't ever actually see it happening, like a lot of the people who claim the quantum immortality theory. It's almost as if a different version of me has died and their final memories get uploaded to my brain seconds after they die. For a while, the occurrences were happening very frequently. It was freaking me out. But they seem to have subsided a bit in the last few years, and I'm not sure if I'm just not dying as much, or if my connection to the other me's has gotten weaker. I've tried explaining this to my family and friends, and I'm sure they think I'm either making it up, or I've got something seriously wrong with me mentally. But thought the listeners here would understand what I'm going through. So, my wife and I work in the same building, which is great, because we often walk to work together. This morning we left the house, and my wife realized, as we passed by the doctor's office, that she forgot she had a doctor's appointment. So, she stopped off there and I continued on to work. Nothing crazy. It's the same walk I take every morning. A straight shot down the main street until you reach downtown. I noticed a familiar face in the distance. An old Italian man who would routinely sit outside of his apartment on the main street to say his hellos to neighborhood commuters. I guess something to just keep him busy. I always looked forward to his good mornings. But, see, this guy died a couple of months ago. So I crossed the street and convinced myself it was just a look-alike. Almost simultaneously, I saw him, knew he was dead, and dismissed it all as a case of mistaken identity. I thought nothing else of it and continued on to work. Once I made it to work, I dove right in, sipping my morning coffee. My wife calls me and says, "I think I'm hallucinating." I was slightly concerned because she'd just had blood work done, and then she explained to me that she has just seen our dead neighbor in the exact same place that he always was in the morning and exactly how I saw him. What's crazy is that I've just started reading into this sub and felt truly connected to the idea of switching across dimensions. I never spoke about this with my wife because I was a bit embarrassed to explain such an out there concept. She literally said to me that she thinks we switched dimensions. I feel like this is something she would never say, but I guess I also thought I would never see my dead neighbor sitting on the side of the road. We literally saw this guy's funeral, and multiple posts on social media mourning his death. He had somewhat of a neighborhood legacy, yet nothing now. It's all nowhere to be found. Has anyone experienced something similar? Sometimes, I would wake myself up during the night realizing that I had stopped breathing. I thought this was something normal, not realizing that it was sleep apnea. This one particular night, I realized that I wasn't breathing and awakened looking at my curtains, which had little red cherries in a leaf pattern. Then I looked again and the red cherries were gone. There was only the leaf pattern. My immediate thought was that I had actually died, and my consciousness had shifted to a parallel world with another version of me. I went back to sleep, and when I awoke, I realized that this was not a dream. Over the next few days, I noticed different changes in this new reality. What really shocked me was that the geography on a globe I was looking at was different in many ways. The more I researched this, I found out that it was being referred to as what people call the Mandela effect. There were so many things different than what I remembered. I know that this is not my home planet, but a parallel world. I'm beginning to believe that I may be one of the millions, and that maybe there was a disaster on my home world. That explains why so many people notice all these changes. I've studied things like quantum physics and superposition, of course, parallel worlds, to try and understand this. The fact of the matter is that this did happen. A version of me died that night, and I shifted, or rather my consciousness shifted, to this reality.